All right, everybody, welcome to Houseplant Academy 2026, the first class of the season. This is the Terrariums Growing an Indoor World Under Glass. And we did this one last year as well, and it was very popular and asked for again, so we're doing it again. Now, this is a part visual instruction. Okay, thank you. And part workshop in person. So we have people.
May just want to walk around out in front.
Okay. So we have people in person here who are going to be creating terrariums, and then we have people online who are actually going to be just learning about it and watching on the PowerPoint. And then at the end of this, we're going to open it up for questions, both virtually and in person. After questions, we're going to say goodbye to our virtual participants, and people who are here in person will make some terrariums. So let's get away. Let's see if it clicks. It will be clicking, Lisa.
You should turn it on.
No.
One side.
All right. Well, it's on, but it's not malfunction. Should I just go back to the laptop? Sorry, guys, we're having a few technical difficulties, which I would expect nothing less. Pretty typical for me anyway. Bear with us for a second, please.
Try it again.
Okay. Well, while you wait, you can admire this terrarium in this picture. What I really like about this one is it's turned on its side.
Yeah.
You need to kind of think outside the glass jar whenever you make a terrarium. I like to go to thrift stores and find little things to use. Today, I brought a little miniature coffee pot. This is something that you may not normally think of as a terrarium container, but it's perfect. And this was, I think, $1 at the thrift store. We have all kinds of things like that we can use.
Okay. So.
All right, that's fine. Okay. All right, here we go. This thing's getting carried away. Okay, so what is a terrarium? It's a closed, transparent glass or plastic container that creates a mini environment or ecosystem for plants. And so glass or plastic are the two most common materials. You don't really want to use anything else. I typically advise against colored glass because it interferes too much with the sun coming through. But any sort of clear glass or fogged plastic would be great, or anti-fog plastic. And how does it work? So the water from the soil is taken up into the plant as it grows, and then it's released via transpiration. So it's basically a little water cycle you're creating in the container. It waters itself, it exhales, and then the water comes down again. So you hardly ever have to water this thing. How long does it last? So plants can go for a long time without watering because I mentioned the mini water cycle. Sometimes terrariums last 1 to 2 years. We're going to be talking about one that's lasted much longer. I have terrariums that have lasted about 5 years, I think, so far. It just really depends on the environment in your home, how much light it's getting, how much water you started with, the condition of the plants to begin with. So the history of terrarium, this will be a brief history. You won't be tested on this, but it's interesting to know, you may have heard of a Wardian case before. So a Wardian case is kind of a fancy way of saying a terrarium. It was invented by Nathaniel Ward in the 19th century, and he was a London physician and plant enthusiast who really wanted to grow ferns around his home. But he wasn't able to because of the terrible London pollution. And this is kind of difficult for me to imagine because you think about our world being more polluted now, you assume it is. In many ways, it probably is, but you can go in downtown Atlanta and grow plants. It's not a big deal. But here in London, it was so polluted he couldn't even grow his ferns. So not trying to do that, he buried the chrysalis of a sphinx moth inside of a jar, and then he was surprised to see a fern emerging along with some moss. So he let it go and stumbled upon this method of growing ferns in a jar. He kept it closed for 4 years with no water added, and it still survived. Then he went on to design those glazed Wardian cases, which were used to ship plant specimens overseas. And this was really the beginning of a plant exchange between the U.S. and other countries. A lot of the most of the tropical plants that we have today, we would not have had unless something like this was invented. Plant explorers would try to ship plants across the sea and, crates and things, and they would arrive dead. And it was just a lot of failed trial and error. So this terrarium, this is the oldest known planted terrarium. And you can see how big it is and obviously how old it is. He planted this in 1960 with some composted organic matter and some spiderwort seeds and water. He only opened it again in 1972, and then he's kept it closed the rest of the time. So it's a pretty amazing thing. It's got the perfect conditions for no maintenance. It was in the right light. He chose the right amount of water whenever he created this thing. He chose a plant that's really suited for this. So it was really a set of perfect conditions. And I like this picture of him too, because even he looks kind of surprised that this thing has survived this long. So the first thing you want to do when you want to make a terrarium is choose your vessel. And like I said, try to be creative. I've got some mason jars for us to use today. I also brought a few containers from home that I can part with. And I have that little miniature coffee pot that's really cute. It doesn't have to be your typical container. It can be something totally off the wall and interesting. Before you buy something, try to repurpose some old containers from your home or a thrift store or flea market. And then you can look online. A lot of times you can get glass dishes and different vessels online for a really cheap price that could be really interesting to look at. Tools that you'll want to use for building your terrarium. So as you'll notice, usually the openings to your terrarium are much smaller than when you're working outside or with an indoor plant. You're going to want smaller tools because you don't want to be clunking around in a little jar with your trowel and your pitchfork. So a small paintbrush is very helpful for dusting those leaves, a small spray bottle for watering, an old fork and spoon. I love using my old fork and spoon to get the plant situated just right. Long tweezers are wonderful for this. Pencils or chopsticks to kind of position things. It's difficult to get your hand and your fist sometimes in there without making a mess of the terrarium or botching things up. A funnel, and this is something that I was kicking myself because I did not bring my funnel today, and I love my funnel for terrariums. It's a way to pour the soil in without the soil flying everywhere. You've got this narrow opening for the soil in the top of the terrarium, and you want the soil to stay within that little part. So you can also make that with newspaper or cardboard. It doesn't have to be a funnel that you purchase, but I really like mine that I've got. And then, of course, scissors. You always need scissors. So the ideal lighting and temperature, you want to place it within several feet of a bright window, but not in direct sun. If you put your terrarium in direct sun, it will cook it. Keep in mind it's closed, it's a sealed environment, so if it's got all that direct sun and heat coming on it, they will just burn to a crisp. East and west facing windows are best. I've got several terrariums just next to my front door, which is west facing. I rarely have to water them, and they're still thriving a couple of years later. A dish garden containing plants that need to receive bright light can be placed there, but that's really the exception. If you do a dish garden that is open with succulents or air plants, that's a different story than your closed terrarium with these tropical low light plants. So a terrarium in low light conditions can benefit from a fluorescent light or a 100-watt bulb. I haven't had to use that for my terrariums. I've got enough light in my home. If you have a lot of shade and a lot of trees in your yard, you might benefit from using a plant light. And then typical home temperatures. You don't want to have this thing in freezing. You don't want to have it in a super hot area. Typical, 70-ish temperatures are perfect for it. We actually had a party for my daughter this weekend, and her friends wanted to make terrariums, and they made them in mason jars on my deck. And my daughter and her friend left theirs outside. Well, it poured down rain. I mean, we got so much rain, and the poor things were just flooded. I tried to salvage them both. One survived, and then it was really cold as well. The point being that is not an ideal condition for your terrarium. You don't want to have your terrarium in the rain if you ever decide to put it outside in the spring or summer to get some air. So it's got many advantages when you're growing a terrarium. There are a lot of plants that are difficult to grow in the dry air of our homes. A lot of you probably have struggled with ferns and caladiums and alocasias and other things that just, they really need a lot of moisture, just the right amount of light. And you can do those in a terrarium. You can have a planting space in your home when maybe you don't really have a yard or a patio or a good space to garden. It's always tropical inside your house, no matter what. So if it's the winter time and you are really itching to work with plants, you always have your tropical terrarium there. They're very low care and low maintenance. That's not to say no care, no maintenance, but very low. So great plants for a closed terrarium. I have them listed here. This is just a few, a smattering of them. Begonia, croton, dracaena, polka dot plant. I really love Photonia. I use that one a lot. Photonia is the botanical name for a nerve plant, and you can find those quite often in like, your big box stores, your nurseries. You can pretty much always access those. Plants for an open terrarium are going to be your African violets, air plants, cacti, succulents. Those do not want humidity and moisture and wet leaves. Carnivorous plants, that will just depend on the plant and your setup. Be mindful if you buy carnivorous plants from like a Walmart or a Home Depot or wherever that has them in little plastic containers. They're kind of gimmicky. What people don't often know is they go through a long dormant cycle. So if you buy one and you think you're taking care of it properly and all of a sudden it goes, completely black for a while, it might just be its dormant period. And sometimes those are not always raised to last a very long time. So really the plant choices will depend on your individual home temperatures, the humidity in your home, the lighting. Take all that into consideration. It's just like with your house plant. So when you have a house plant, your own home environment is going to really dictate how well those plants do. So as I said, for sourcing these plants, it's really a good idea to purchase tiny plants. They're ideal for that. You don't have to. Like right here, I purchased a hanging basket, and the people who are visiting virtually are not able to see. But if you go to a Home Depot or Lowe's and you get a hanging basket of a plant, you can separate that into about 10 or 12 different plants. So for $20, I made several little tiny plants. Or you can go to Amazon, local nurseries. You can propagate your own. I've got some pothos and some trades canty over here that we've propagated in the office. Big box stores, like I said, and then I mentioned the breaking of the larger plants. That's really a good money saver there. So soil media for terrariums, you always want to use indoor potting soil. You don't want to use your regular garden soil because it will hold too much water. So no topsoil, no raised bed soil, none of that goes outdoors. It needs to be a potting mix. You don't want to hold too much water for obvious reasons. You don't want to give your plants root rot. And also that extra moisture, you want moisture, but not too much. There's a sweet spot. Extra moisture can harbor pathogens that you don't want to introduce to your terrarium, like fungus and different things. A cacti succulent mix is for growing plants in open terrariums like your cacti and succulents that want a more arid environment, and try not to mix these up. So it really, not to put too fine of a point on it, but you really need to have the right soil mix for your plant. Succulents only for your succulent cacti, indoor potting for your tropicals, carnivorous plant soil for your carnivorous plants. Those carnivorous plants, they don't usually grow well in a regular indoor potting soil or cacti succulent mix. They have very specific requirements for fertilization. They're very low fertilizer needs. I would not go that route. Okay. So how to build a terrarium. It's kind of straightforward, but there are some tips and tricks that will make it easier and more successful for you. So they're usually viewed from one side. It's a good idea to slope the potting soil for viewing on that side. Something we don't always think about. A lot of times people will make them just completely leveled out, and that's fine, but you give yourself a little more interest visually, and you also help the draining situation when you pot it in a slope. Try to do a variety of colors and textures. If you're doing a very small terrarium, maybe just do one plant. But if you're doing a bigger one, you don't want it to be so busy. You don't want to put a whole lot of variegated plants together because it'll just be, it'll look like a bit of a circus in there. Variegated plants are lovely, but say like this pink Photonia that I have, this pink nerve plant, if I put that with a bunch of other colorful things, it could just look really busy and kind of messy. Think of it like you design your gardens outdoors. You want a place for the eyes to rest and some peace in there. It's really nice to incorporate your natural elements like wood and rocks and sand, fairy garden figures. You can find these all over now. One of the best places that I have found to get those figurines is Dollar Tree, only because they have them every season, and I go and I'll buy like 20 packs of them. They're $1.25, and you get 2 figurines per pack. And so, I mean, I spend like $10 to $15 for essentially 40 figurines. It's a very good price. You can spend a little more money and get a little fancier. Michael's has a little bit more what's another word for fancy, but a little nicer, more professional looking setup, you're going to pay a little bit more, but they are pretty cute. So always thoroughly clean and disinfect your container before you plant. If you're using new containers, you probably just want to rinse it out with some hot water. But if you're buying something from a thrift store, if you're taking an old, dish from somewhere, you want to make sure it's disinfected and you don't introduce those pathogens to your plants. If you use glass cleaner, which I don't really advise, but if you really want to use glass cleaner because you think it's streaky or it's foggy, make sure you wait a couple of days after applying the glass cleaner before you put your plants in, because that glass cleaner could really mess with your plants. So charcoal, you'll want to line the bottom of whatever vessel you use with some horticultural charcoal, and that's naturally antimicrobial. So even though you've got that charcoal, which is going to absorb odors and prevent the growth of fungi and bacteria, you also want to be mindful of how much water you put in. Using charcoal doesn't mean you can dump a ton of water in there. It's all going to balance out. You still want to be mindful of that. Sphagnum moss is a really nice thing to use. Rehydrate it, and you can put it between your charcoal and your soil. Now, something that people often want to do, it's kind of a common practice, is put pebbles as a layer in their terrarium. And at Extension, we really advise against that, because what you're doing is you're creating what they call a perched water table, which is essentially just a layer of a pool of water that's stagnant in your terrarium. Great breeding ground for fungus gnats and other bugs. Not a good idea. The look of pebbles in a terrarium is very nice. If you would like to get that look, put them around the side, around the edges of your terrarium, so you can still see them, but they're not in there as a full layer. Okay, so add your soil, make sure it's slightly damp but not sopping wet, that sweet spot there. If you take it straight from the bag, you're going to have all kinds of dust come up. It's going to coat the insides of your terrarium jar. You want it to be moist so you can really have more control over it. You don't want it to be wetty and, muddy and wet and sticking to the sides of your glass, kind of like when you work in the garden. You know it's too wet to work in the garden if it's all mud. You're looking for that sweet spot. So it's great to use a chopstick or a pencil to make little holes in your growing medium to put those plants. Make sure your plants is kind of obvious and, common sense, but make sure that they're healthy and disease-free. Don't take one of your plants that just didn't do so well in a pot and maybe it had mealybugs or it had this. Well, let's see what it does in a terrarium. No, don't do that. This is not the time to experiment with unhealthy plants. Use healthy and disease-free plants. As I said, don't put too many or only variegated plants together. It'll look too busy with too many stripes going on. Try to get some serene green in there, and make sure that you're picking the right type of plant for whatever vessel you're using. So like these mason jars, I'm not going to put a really tall plant in there, obviously. I'm going to take something shorter. I might cut it down a little bit. If I've got a really large terrarium, I'm going to maybe pick a different mix of plants. So right plant, right place applies to terrariums as well. And then grooming your plants. So you want to trim any yellow or decaying leaves before you put them in a terrarium. Very similar to what we do when we're potting our house plants. We don't want the yellow and the dead stuff on there. Get rid of it. It's just going to harbor germs. It's not only unsightly, but it can introduce illness and disease into your terrarium. So once you put it together, stand back and observe it, look at it from different angles and see if you like it, and make changes if necessary. Keep in mind that it's an experiment. It doesn't have to be perfect. And if you put it together and it doesn't look good, you can just take stuff out and rearrange it. It's not so serious. It's meant to be fun. So placing plants in deep containers or ones with small openings, the ones with small openings are so cute, like this one here in this visual, but they're difficult to get your media and your plants in there. To get your hands sometime in that opening right there is just too much. Using long tongs or tweezers is good, or stick with a wire loop. Sometimes people will wrap their plants in paper to protect the plant and the container. So imagine taking your plant, wrapping it in some newspaper and sliding it down. That way it's not getting caught up on the sides. Once you get it in there, unwrap the paper and you can remove it. Mist the plants off to wash off soil and give them a head start. Always watch them the first few days, especially to make sure you don't have any early signs of decay or disease. Before I mist my plants, before I water them, I like to take a little paintbrush and go through and wipe off any soil or dust. It's so much easier to clean it off when it's dry than when it's wet. So use that paintbrush first before you add the water. Pruning, so you will want to trim your plants as they get too tall because they'll start to touch the sides and reach out, and it may look kind of cool for a while, but then it could create a situation where there's just too much plant matter in there. You're going to get some decay, some fungus, some bacteria. Like I said, these are low maintenance, but not no maintenance. They really aren't meant to grow at a rapid rate when you put a plant in a terrarium. So you rarely have to use fertilizer. I think maybe once a year I've given my plants some fertilizer because, they do need a little something. But you want to apply that at like a quarter of a strength. You don't want to overload them and cause this explosion of growth in this tiny little vessel. So after you move it to wherever you want it to be, try to keep it there. Try to find a place and land, as my dad would say. Because if you frequently change the light intensity and where you have it, it's going to mess with the whole equilibrium. It's a closed system. It doesn't want to go from bright to dark and this to that. It wants to have a steady ecosystem. And then if those water droplets form on the inside walls or lid, open the lid and let it air out a little bit. It looks nice. A little bit of that is good, but too much means it's too wet, and too wet for too long equals root rot, fungus rot. And that means when you tear off the lid and you smell, you're going to be hit with a really disgusting odor and your plant's going to die and you'll have to start over from the beginning. So always remove anything dead or decaying as soon as you see it. Just get it out of there. Some people like to take some diluted hydrogen peroxide and just wipe around there to get some of that out. That works really well. So I like to put acorns and pine cones in my terrariums. I like to use little natural elements. I learned early on that they invite mold. They're not meant to just live in this really moist, wet environment and not grow mold. So if you don't want to use artificial things like little toys or little figurines, then you will want to coat your acorns and pine cones in some polyurethane, just like you would for your garden pots you want to put outside, you want to protect them. Coat it in polyurethane, you'll be good. Mold inside of a terrarium is often a sign of an imbalance, meaning there's too much moisture, too much water, poor air ventilation, maybe there's some decaying plant matter. Take that lid off and let it air out. Remove any diseased plants from there. Give it some air and maybe some lower light or some more light, and you'll be in a better situation. Wipe down the glass and remove mold or algae buildup as you go. It's a very important thing to stay on top of that because once it gets out of control and left too long, it's better just to scrap it and start over. So as I said, if you encounter mold in terrariums, don't freak out. It's very common, and most of us have a little bit of mold in the beginning. You'll see that. It doesn't mean the end of your terrarium. It doesn't mean that it's doomed. Like I said, the diluted hydrogen peroxide or diluted vinegar, always diluted. You don't want to apply that stuff directly, full strength to your plants. Use that for your surfaces. Rubbing alcohol is great. Rubbing alcohol, as you know, can be used for mealybugs and lots of other pests like scale. So it's very safe to use around your plants. Chamomile tea, if you have that in your home and you want to apply some of that as a fungicide to your terrarium, you can use that to water your terrarium. Very helpful. Using distilled water, I have to admit, I don't always use distilled water. I water my terrarium so rarely. And when I do, I don't use distilled water. However, if you at your house know you have a lot of salt that will build up in your plants, maybe you want to do that, or you want to just prevent that from happening. Or say if you see that occurring, you see some salts forming in the soil, just start using distilled water and that'll take care of the problem. So this is really fun. I always say that I'm going to do this, and I still haven't done it. You can make your terrarium a bioactive terrarium. So we've all heard of, buying good bugs and beneficial bugs to help our situation with our plants. You can introduce springtails to be a cleanup crew in your terrarium, which I think is so cool. They can increase the amount of moss in your terrarium because they help the female and the male moss to reproduce, which is a very cool thing I didn't know before. It's a nice thing, something you can kind of give as an extra added boost to your terrarium to keep the health and the ecosystem going well. So fun elements. I think it's really fun, as I mentioned, to get the little figurines and things from like Dollar Tree, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, Pike. Those are some places I've all gotten really good items from. Seasonal is a lot of fun too. So if you have a terrarium, you don't just have to stick it in the corner and let it go and never look at it again. I like to put things in for Halloween. I like to put a little scarecrow in there for Thanksgiving. I like to put Christmas stuff in there. I put a little, I mean, it's fun, you know, if you have kids in your house, I do. Maybe you don't, maybe you just like whimsical things, but I think it makes it a lot more fun and, you know, gets you a little more engaged with it. So this was a Christmas holiday terrarium that I did. I think I got those little candy cane or those little candy stripe mushrooms, and just I saved them from year to year. And then I put some polyurethane on the acorn. I just have it next to my sink around Christmas time. It's a lot of fun. If you have some things from your vacation, like some seashells or different things you might find on the beach, those are fun to put in a terrarium. Your kids might like that. Fall, Halloween, I love putting in this witch's hat. I think it's so cute. When I found that, I was like, yes, yes, that's a perfect little Halloween decoration with the pine cone and the acorns. For fall, I put a little pumpkin in there. And I will say the pumpkin will get some mold or some fungus on it. You can put some polyurethane on it, or you can dip a pumpkin in some bleach water before you put it in the terrarium, and that'll make it last much, much longer.
Nicole, should we do the same thing for the seashells? Do they have to be treated before you put them in the terrarium, like the acorns as well?
Okay, so we have a question from one of our in-person viewers about like seashells, if they need to be treated before you put them in the terrarium. Actually, I haven't done that, but if you notice an odor on your seashells, sometimes they have like just an earthy scent, but if you notice kind of a fishy odor, you might want to, you know, dunk them in some bleach water or do something. I haven't had an issue, like I said, but you can, you know, prevention is key. So just a moss terrarium. For a while, I've never been able to get moss to live for a very long time in an open bowl like this, but just purchasing that and having that in an open bowl on my counter for a couple of months was worth it because it was so cute and everybody liked it. And every time I looked at it, I liked it. And I had that little sign about like some good things coming in small packages, or I don't know what, I can't read it. My old eyes can't see the small print, but it says something cute. And so, yeah, that's just something fun to do, to kind of think outside the traditional terrarium, put it in a bowl, put some mosses in with some decor and set it somewhere and treat it like a seasonal flower arrangement even. This is my Thanksgiving look for my terrarium. And then I say evening ambiance, like I'm so fancy, but I got those little floating water candles. I got like a huge pack of them on Amazon for a really cheap deal. And then I always have water gardens outside my house during the spring and summer and fall. And if you grow water lettuce, you'll realize that it propagates like crazy. I mean, you're always cutting it and taking it out. I mean, you end up with way more than you could ever use. So when those water lettuces created little pups, I just cut them off. I put them in this jar. I put a little water candle in there, and it's really nice. So anyway, just something fun to do, a way for you to garden indoors and feel connected to plants, and also a little, you know, novelty and excitement in your life. Vintage charm. So this one, I confess to consuming a lot of horticulture media and information online, and I can sometimes be swayed to purchase things by people who talk about them in a positive way. So there is a horticulturist named Leslie Halleck, and she actually teaches at, I think, UCLA Extension, and she has a horticultural business as well. She's written some books, and she talked about these Libby's glass mushrooms that were all the rage apparently in the 70s. And she said, oh, I have a whole set and I have every size. You can go on Etsy. And so what did I do? I went on Etsy, and now I have like a bunch of these in different sizes, but it's really fun to experiment with different shapes. Like I said, don't consider yourself limited to just a traditional jar. So that is really the end of my presentation for virtual. And then now we're going to move to the workshop section. But before we do that, if anybody online has a question that I can answer, or anybody in person has a question I can answer before we disconnect with our online viewers.
There's nothing yet.
Nothing yet. Okay. It's pretty straightforward. Honestly, I think it all kind of makes sense. If you have a little bit of experience with plants, you just have to give them what they want, figure out what they want and give them that. And that's pretty much the way it works with terrariums as well. So make sure that you don't get it too wet. You're getting the right light. Everything's clean and healthy to begin with, and you're maintaining it. So yeah, if that is the case and we don't have any questions or comments, yes.
You have to open these occasionally to get air into them. They mess with on carbon dioxide. So.
Yeah, they recycle. Yeah. So we had a question from someone in person about needing to open the terrarium to see if they can get air. So they actually recycle air. But if you find that yours are getting, they're getting stinky or they're getting too much water, there probably were full with too much water to begin with. That was probably the issue. So if you create your terrarium and you're like, oh, this seems a little too wet, leave it open for a little while until it kind of dries out somewhat to a regular level.
You put the plant list over this.
Oh, yes. I will put the plant list back up. Let's go through all of this. And also, if you ever have questions for people in person or online, if you have questions about your terrarium or specifics that you need answers to, you can contact us here at Extension. You can contact us. We're a UGA Extension in Lawrenceville. Look at our website. We have a list of all of our classes that are coming up online and in person. We have our email address. We have our phone number. So we have free garden classes and free advice. Doesn't cost anything to call or email and ask us questions, and we have a whole staff that can talk to you about it. So you can even bring your plants in. So if you have a terrarium that you have questions about and you want me to look at it, you can send me a picture of it, or you could actually bring it to the office and we can look at it during office hours and discuss it. So we're very accessible. That's one of the best things about this service. Yes.
Will you share your slide deck with everybody?
Yes, I had a question if I will share my slide deck, and yes, I will. Yes, probably not today because I've got a training to go to, but after that, maybe tomorrow or next week, soon. Okay. Anything else, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm gonna share the Metro Master Gardener YouTube link.
Yeah. So we have a Metro Master Gardener YouTube link. Every one of these classes that we do, they get recorded, and then Lisa, our program assistant, uploads them to our Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, which is a free YouTube channel with all of our classes. So if you happen to miss one that you really wanted to see, chances are you go on there, you'll find that and a ton more. It's also nice just if you want to look around on there, you'll see a lot of classes that I've done and a ton that Lisa has done on really every gardening topic you can imagine, and it's free. So check that out as well.
Nothing here.
So if we don't have any more questions or comments or anything, I will go ahead and say goodbye to our online viewers, and I hope to hear from you and how you're doing with your terrariums. And we will move on to our workshop.